Good morning to everyone. My name is Asive Qikwa, and I'm from the National Department of Forestry, Fisheries and Environment under the Biosecurity Directorate. I'll be sharing my presentation today on the permitting process in terms of the Alien and Invasive Species Regulations of 2020 as amended. So basically, the outline of my presentation will be as follows. Firstly, I will just give a brief background on the NEMBA Ais Regulations. And then secondly, I'll be sharing why are we issuing permits for alien and invasive species. Then that will be followed by a slide on the restricted activities in terms of the NEMBA Ais Regulations, the risk assessment and the risk assessment process, and the applicable fees in terms of the permit application process, and then finally the prescribed fees for lodging permit applications. The NEMBA Alien and Invasive Species Regulations were published by the Department of Environmental Affairs in August 2014, and then they came into effect in October 2014. So the regulations were amended in 2020, and of which they became effective. The amendments became effective in March 2021. So as a priority, the purpose of the regulations first is to prevent the illegal introduction of alien and potential invasive species into the country. And then secondly, is to regulate listed invasive species and potential invasive species that are already occurring in the country. So, in terms of the regulations, invasive species are listed into 4 different categories. And the first category is category 1A. And as the previous speaker has alluded, those are species that we want to combat. We're targeting early detection, and then we don't want them at all in the country. The second category is category 1B, and those are species that need to be controlled. However, control should be done in accordance with an invasive species management plan. And then the third category of species is category 2, and in category 2 species are those species that require permits. So people are allowed to conduct certain activities with such species, however, they need to do such having acquired a permit from our department. And then finally, the fourth category that we have is category 3, and those are species that are subject to some prohibitions and exemptions. So why are permits issued? In my presentation, I'll be dwelling more on the category 2 species, which are the species that we issue permits for. So firstly, permits are issued to regulate category 2 invasive species within the country. And then secondly, to regulate the import, which is the introduction of new species into the country. In terms of category 2 invasive species, these are species that have value and benefits. So as much as the previous speaker said all the bad things about invasive species, there are some of the species that are good, that we as human benefit from, which have value, and it can be for health purposes. It can also be for commercial purposes. So, in terms of the permitting, these such species that are listed under category 2, you need to apply for a permit, and then the permit authorizes you to conduct some restricted activities involving those species. An example that I can give in terms of that is, in farming, there are species that are used to protect high value crops, which might be your fruit trees. And those species, an example is the Casaronia cuningamiana, which is a beefwood tree. This tree is used mostly in the Western Cape region as a windbreak. So normally, farmers plant those trees around their orchard trees in order to protect wind from destroying their crops. So in terms of our permitting, those species are listed under category 2 because they have those benefits to farmers, because they can protect their trees from winds. So for you to be able to conduct such activities of planting those trees, you need to apply for a permit with us. That was just one of the examples that I have in terms of why do we require permits, and then why do we issue permits for such species. So the second point, in terms of regulating importation, we issue import permits. Let's say if someone wants to introduce a species which is not already occurring in the country, we normally refer to those in terms of the regulation as aliens, species that are not yet known to occur in the country. A person needs to apply with us, and even though it needs to follow a risk assessment process, need to submit a risk assessment for us to know and to be able to assess what kind of risk might be posed by the introduction of that particular species into the country. So that's the second part where permits are required. So in terms of the restricted activities, we issue permits to carry out restricted activities involving specimen of an alien and invasive species, and also research purposes. So on the next slide, I'll dwell more on what restricted activities are and what is allowed in terms of permit and what is not allowed. And then also in terms of research, for you to conduct any research involving listed invasive species or even alien species for that matter, you need to apply for a permit, and then you need to be granted a permit before you can proceed with your research. So those are the primary reasons for the issuing of permits in terms of the regulations. So I'm just gonna touch on the restricted activities in terms of the NAMBA Act. So if you could look there on the category 2 species, in terms of all the restricted activities that we have here, and I have touched on this, importing into the Republic, so you do need a permit for category 2 species. However, for the other categories, for example, your 1A, it is prohibited, you can't introduce, we won't issue you a permit for introducing a category 1A species. So having in possession, for example, is kind of different here. For a category 1B, for example, you can be in possession of a category 1B species. However, you're not allowed to conduct any other restricted activities. You can't trade them or you can't propagate them. So in terms of the restricted activities, as you can all see, for category 2 species, for all the restricted activities that are mentioned here, you require permits in order for you to be able to conduct any of these restricted activities. This is just a continuation of the restricted activities, and maybe if you are interested in any of these and you pick one up, you can always engage me outside, and then I can be able to explain furthermore if you need some more clarity on them. So basically, in terms of the species that need permit, we have 118 category 2 invasive species that need permits. In terms of our NAMBA AIS list, our species are categorized into marine invertebrates, freshwater invertebrates, freshwater fish, amphibians, reptiles, birds, mammals, and plants. So if you apply for a plant species, you will be able to issue you a permit that speaks to the species that you applied for, and then that same thing applies for the different taxon that is mentioned there. Then the other part that normally needs more clarity from our side in terms of our applicants is the risk assessment and the risk assessment process. So in terms of our regulation, whenever you are submitting an application to conduct any restricted activity involving alien and listed invasive species, you need to provide a risk assessment. So the risk assessment should be in accordance with the regulation 16.1 and or 16.5 of our regulations. So I'm just gonna explain both and where the difference is between the two. So the first one, which is 16.1, it applies when one is importing a species into the country, and also when they are conducting activities that involves growing, breeding, or spreading listed alien and invasive species. And this particular risk assessment needs to be conducted by an environmental assessment practitioner. So it should be someone who has a bit of knowledge on our regulation, and they must be registered by the South African Council of Natural Science Professionals. I think it's SACNAS. Yes. So, and the second one is a more simpler version, and it mostly applies on those species that are normally already occurring in the country. And let's say if someone wants to is already in possession of a particular species, and then now they were alerted that they need a permit for that particular species, we have a guideline that we call Guideline for Information Required for listed Category 2 species. So this risk assessment, you as the applicant can complete it without the services of an IP, of an environmental assessment practitioner. So depending on the activities that you're conducting, you then have to follow or use the risk assessment framework as per the activities that you're conducting. So normally, sometimes we used to have issues of applicants inquiring in terms of the risk assessment, the environmental assessment practitioners are expensive. Do they really need to do this? Do they really need to do that? And then from there, that's when we decided that no, there needs to be a simpler version whereby a person can be able to do this on their own, unless for those activities that we have there as mentioned on the top. And then this is the next slide I have is the permitting process when you're lodging an application. So there's two processes involved, and one, I'm not sure if I made this clear from the onset. So when you normally refer to alien species, it's those species that are not yet occurring in the country, that are still going, that are the new introductions of imports. So in terms of the permit application process, when you are importing into the Republic, this is the process that you follow. You as the applicant, you first identify the species of your interest, and then you consult us, or you can even consult the internet for our permit application form and our risk assessment guidelines. And then you lodge the application with our office. And then what happens with the aliens, you must just note this part. That's the most important part between this process and the one that I'm going to explain on the following slide. Once you receive your application for alien species, there's an alien species risk assessment review panel, which its secretariat is sitting with SANI. So it's a team of scientists which involves government officials from the province, scientists. So they normally come together, and once we receive an import application, we refer to this panel. So what they do, they give us recommendations based on the risk assessment that has been provided. They then provide us with the recommendations in terms of, do they recommend that we proceed the issuing of the permit or not. However, it still lies with us to decide then if we do issue the permit or not. So upon receipt of the application and verifying, we send it to ASRAP, and then ASRAP sends the risk assessment report and the recommendations back to us. Then that's when we consider the recommendation from ASRAP on whether to issue or we don't issue the permit. Once we have reached a decision, then we notify the applicant on whether are we rejecting or will the permit be issued. So then the next slide it also explains the process. However, this one specifically deals with those listed species. For example, your category 2 species, and maybe when you're also applying for your research. So the same process is in terms of receiving the application, with the applicant identifying the species of interest and obtaining our application form and risk assessment guideline. Then they lodge the application with the department. Then where it differs from the previous slide is that now, once we receive that application, we refer to the affected province for their inputs, not to ASRAP this time. So, let's say if we receive an application for an invasive mammal, let's say Qikwa in Eastern Cape, then after receiving the application, verifying all the documents and then ensuring everything is up to, the application is complete, we refer it to the province for their inputs. So we normally give the province 20 days, working days to get back to us with their inputs. And then once they provided their inputs, once we have received their input, once we have received the input from the province, we consider the inputs that the province have given us in terms of their recommendations. And then again, the process continues. We reach a decision on whether are we rejecting or are we issuing the permits. And once a decision has been taken, we then inform the applicant of the decision that has been taken. So I just had a slide just to give you an idea of the work that we're doing. The first table there on my left is the applications that we have been receiving each month for the past financial year, which is 2021-2022. So in total we received 394 applications, and then that's for the whole of South Africa. And then in terms of permits issued, we issued 389 permits. And for the Eastern Cape province, the applications that we received were 73, and then the permits that we issued for the Eastern Cape is 63. So the last table explains in terms of the taxa, the number of the permits that have been issued for different taxes. So this slide talks to the prescribed fees for lodging an application per restricted activity. So for importation into the country, the applicant has to pay 200 rand application processing fee. So for other restricted activities, it's 100 rands, and for a renewal, it's 50 rands per species. For appeals, it's also 50 rands per species. I think that I've reached the end of the presentation, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Asive. We have now an opportunity to ask questions. Anybody with questions with regard? There we go. Gentlemen,
just
please
bring the microphone.
wait for the mic, announce yourself, tell us who you are and where you're from.
Good morning. Good morning. My name is Lorraine van den Berg. I work at Grootfontein Agricultural College. It's part of Colorado. And I just want to know, I get a lot of farmers phoning me with regards to the planting of saltbush. And I know it is a category 2 invader. So first of all, I want to know, you mentioned plants already existing on an area. So what about farmers that already have saltbush lands, and where do you apply for these permits? Where do you get the application forms?
Okay, thank you very much for the question. As you have mentioned that the species is listed under category 2, and then there are farmers that are already in possession of it. So they need to apply for a permit from us, even though they are already in possession. So these are our details. This is our email address. So you can just drop us an email at aispermits@dffe.gov.za, and those are my contact details on the slide also there. So I can be able to assist you with any inquiries in terms of the process itself and also completing the actual application. So if you have those details, then I'll be able to assist you. Thank you.
Does that answer the question?
Yes.
Fantastic. Lady in front.
Yeah, thanks. I'm Andrea Van Holt, Environmental Manager for Qikwa SEZ here in Port Elizabeth. So just an interesting question, I think it was your second last slide, you showed statistics of the number of applications versus the number of permits issued. And there's obviously more applications than permits issued. Is that a case of not having processed all the applications, or are there circumstances where permits aren't issued? In other words, they are actually refused?
Okay. Yes, in some cases we do refuse the issue of permits. One point to answer your question. And then normally in terms of applications received, as I've told you, in terms of the process that you work, we have to consult, let's say, the province for their inputs. So sometimes there might be delays in terms of feedback from the province, and also the fact that other applications are actually rejected. So that's why you have that difference.
Hi there, I'm Megan Hugo from Indra Environmental Consulting. We are based in East London. I just wanted to get some insights into what are the, especially for the alien imports, what is the normal time, actually, is there any regulatory time frame to get feedback from the panel? So I just want to get an idea of what is the average time frames for these permits to get processed between the aliens and then the other invasive species.
Okay. In terms of that, we do have a standard time that we have to process an application and issue, and it takes up to 60 working days for us to issue a permit. So from the day you submit your application, we verify your documents, and then we confirm that your application is complete. Then you can start counting the 60 days from there. So within that 60 working days, it can be before, it can be any time between that 60 working day time frame. So in terms of getting feedback from the panel, for example, maybe let's say they could get back to us on day 20, and then we're still within that 60-day time frame in order for us to finalize the processing of that payment.
Thank you.
Do we have another question?
I'm Belinda Clark from SEN, Environmental Consultancy at Nelson. I just wanted to check with, if I'm understanding correctly, these permits are obviously required if you're going to be using it for beneficial purposes, and that's how the department regulates the species. But obviously there's often instances where on farms in particular there's heavy infestations of listed species, some of which are category 2, but they're not being used for commercial or beneficial uses. So how does that relate then to the control or the regulator? What mechanisms are there to get landowners to control those species other than through the permitting process?
Okay. Then, with regards to that, when we issue a permit, it has permit conditions. So the permit conditions include measures that you have developed to restrict or prevent further spread of those species outside the area where you are utilizing them. So, and the permit condition, it does clearly stipulate that the landowner or the farmer is responsible for ensuring that the species do not spread outside where they are being utilized. So if this is your demarcated area or this is where you'll be conducting your activities, so they must not be spread outside of that particular area. And then it's the responsibility of the landowner or the permit holder to ensure that they do that.
So I understand that, but my question is more because often we have landowners and you don't apply for permit simply because your land is heavily infested and you're not intending or using it for commercial purposes or beneficial uses, it's just you're not managing the land properly. So obviously then you're not going to initiate a permit application process. So what mechanisms are there to get that landowner, because you're obviously not going to regulate because it doesn't require a permit. So how do we get those landowners to comply and manage the basis on the land?
Okay, no, thank you. Now I think I clearly understand. Yeah, I think we have been experiencing such issues in terms of with other farmers or any landowners not wanting the species, and then it's category 2. And that's where you are. So what we normally advise, the species is category 2, and then you are already in possession of it. So in terms of the law, by the fact that you are already in possession, you do need to have a permit. That's what the law says, regardless of what you want to do or you don't want it. So what we normally advise those people is that apply for a permit, and then in the meantime, you develop a plan on how are you going to be able to get rid of the species. Because if our compliance or even enforcement guys come to visit you, the only thing that they will want is a permit. And then they will know that you were aware, but then you didn't apply for a permit, you ignored it. So what we normally advise the farmers and the landowners is that for now, you must apply for the permit and then try to come up with a plan in terms of how are you going to get rid of the species. And then the department also does offer health assistance in terms of that. So the first step that I'll advise you to do, apply for a permit you understand you don't want. Because most of them sometimes say, I do want maybe 2 or 3 trees, but I don't want the rest. So normally with those ones, we say you can apply and then just try to get rid of the rest that you don't want in your property.
Okay, so I'm not walking.
By all means, just speak into the mic, please.
Oh, sorry. Okay. So let's say we have someone approach us and they wanted to buy a property, and it's in a conservancy, and they want to understand the risks of purchasing the land. The property is heavily invaded with an invasive species, and the regulations, as far as I understand, indicate that the seller needs to disclose that to the buyer, and it needs to be indicated in the sale agreement. And now you mentioned, that the owner of the property should take responsibility and apply for a permit and do a removal plan, which all makes good sense. But I just wondered, what is the onus on the seller? Because that person is now selling a property that's infested, they haven't taken responsibility, and the buyer is accepting that risk. And obviously he's willing to clear it, but from a permitting perspective and a regulatory perspective, how does that work in terms of the regulations? I don't know, put it in the sales agreement.
Can I interject here? We're going to ask Stian to answer that question because it deals with compliance for the moment.
Thank you. So remember when you apply for a permit, first of all, then what happened is after your application has been submitted, one of our inspectors will go out to a property and assess, and then they will actually say yes or no for the permit. However, if you have a property and you want to buy this property but it's highly infested, and Asive or Pam Golding, whoever advised you, so your property is actually more worth when it is eradicated. So you need to tell the seller needs to tell the buyer of the obligations and the responsibilities that are taken over from that property. That is why we would advise any property with a hectare or bigger, please have a management plan in place of how to control that listed species. And like you said, my office can help you with that. I've got a template which I'm happy to share with you. So get our contact details. The next person who will be presenting is actually one of my inspectors in your area that will actually now present on compliance. And under there, get my details and then get in contact with us. We can help you with the guidelines of how to draw up a management plan for the new landowner. But also, it doesn't take away the responsibility as the landowner as it is now. They still the reliable person, just to know that if the deeds are still on that land, then that is the responsible person. However, if you have a management plan in place, that is fine, then you're compliant. I hope it answers your question. Oh, now I've opened all canvas.
Can I just add here? The legislation for the declaration of invasive species, which was in the 2015 legislation, fell away in the latest 2020 legislation. So there is no, whilst everyone has a duty of care, there is no legislated requirement to put a list of species together for a property that is being sold. But having said that, if you do not have a permit for a Category 2 species, it reverts to Category 1B immediately.
Okay, right, so we have it. Let's give somebody else an opportunity. Okay,
Sorry.
No, that's fine.
Good morning, colleagues. My name is Guideline from Transnet National Ports Authority. My question is on Category B alien invasive species. So, for example, let's say we've applied for a permit and we do not get it. What are we supposed to do with the species? That's point number one. And then the second point is, I know that not everyone who applies for a permit will get it. So then what happens for those that don't get the permit? So what are we supposed to do with the species that we have applied for a permit for?
Okay, on your first question, you said category B. I'm not sure that you are referring to 1B or
No, category 2.
category 2.
Yes.
So you said, can you repeat them? I thought you said B. So
No, I meant category 2. So we applied for a permit, but we did not get it. So what are we supposed to do? Do we appeal? Do we remove the trees? Like, what's our recourse?
I think first I need to understand, because if you didn't get a permit, there is once we take a decision that we are rejecting or not issuing a permit, there is communication that's sent to you that explains the reasons for us not granting you a permit. So that's where the engagement starts there, in terms of maybe what you need to do, or let's say you are in a critical biodiversity area, or maybe you are close to a natural water course, so we can't allow you to be in possession of these particular plants or trees. You see, that will be explained in terms of our findings on your risk assessment and the inspections that we conduct at the facility. So there will always be an explanation in terms of the decision that has been taken on why a permit has not been granted. Then, for example, the example that I'm making of, if your species are close to a natural water course, that immediately becomes 1B, meaning that you need to control them now, won't be able to issue a permit. So that's how it works in terms of when you are maybe denied or not granted a permit. So we can't just say we are not giving you, just not get a permit without any explanation, a detailed explanation in terms of why did we take the decision that we took.
Okay, no, that's fine. Maybe the details of the application are a bit sketchy, because I think there was also an issue of us applying to a wrong authority. But now, so you are saying there should be explanations in the event that we want to keep the tree, or in the event that we can't comply to all the regulations or the conditions of the permit,
then I think I do have speakers here from our enforcement team and also compliance, and then they will definitely tell you in terms of how the law will deal with you then if you don't do the right thing.
Okay, that's fine, thank you.
Okay, we are going to, I think many questions will be answered as we go through compliance and then enforcement. Gentleman in front. Warren.
My name is Cole. Our company advises on and supplies appropriate herbicides for control of alien plants. My question relates to the issuing of a permit for category 2 species. And what I would like to know is, is the onus on the landowner, or is it a requirement for the landowner to demonstrate beneficial use of a species in order to get a permit? Or can he just simply apply for a permit so that it goes on record, the demarcated area, and then use that permit to actually hide the fact that he's got category 2 aliens and he's not planning to do anything about it? He's not actually needing it. He hasn't demonstrated his dependency on the species or any beneficial use, but perhaps he uses the permit system to not do anything about his aliens. That's my question.
Okay, thanks for that. I think from the, if you heard when I was introducing the categories, like from 1A, 2 and all of those, when I talked to category 2 species, I did emphasize that those, by virtue of them being listed under category 2, they are species that are known to have benefits. So if you have a category 2 species in your possession, it means that you value that species and it has benefits to you as a landowner. So that's why when you apply, you just inform us about, for example, in your risk assessment, you just inform us about what are you doing with the species, why are you keeping the species and all that. So it's not about you hiding or anything, but the mere fact that it's listed under category 2, we know that it's a species of value and you have it for a certain purpose. Unless it's circumstances like the lady raised that you no longer want it and it's just there in the facility. But since it's category 2 species and then it's listed, you just require a permit. And then it's like we know that it has value and it has benefit. So you having it means that you are utilizing it for a certain purpose.
Does that answer the question? question. It's also, remember, there are conditions to the permit as well, especially for spreading of that species. So there is an onus on containment of the species within the demarcated area. Do we have any more questions? We move, last from the lady in front. Here we go.
Maybe just, sorry.
We'll after you. After them, get you.
Morning, I'm What I wanted to ask is that what are the penalties if the species get out of control? What's the applicant must do?
I'm going to hold that answer because that's going to be dealt with enforcement. And when we do that presentation, you're going to get all the answers you need to that one.
Okay, thank you.
Warren. And then we'll take the gentleman as the last question for the session.
Thank you, I'll be quick. I think it's two questions. So if we use the example of jointed cactus, I'm not 100% sure what category, but I've taken it's 1A, and you don't need a permit for it because there's no beneficial use. So you have to, as a landowner, eradicate it. Asive, you mentioned that the department offers assistance. I know back in the day, agriculture department offered herbicides, etc. Is that the type of assistance you're referring to? If not, what type of assistance is there to eradicate?
Okay. Yes, yeah, that's the same assistance that I'm referring to, but I think I do have my colleague Dave. She will touch on that, or she can address that even now. She can address your question.
Here we go.
Cacti are all 1B species except a couple. What the cactus you're referring to is a 1B species, and it generally will depend on where that species is, whether it falls into one of our identified management units, and then the assistance would either be land user assistance, so we with teams to control, or herbicide assistance. So there's different kinds of assistance that we would provide as Working for Water or NRM as we now know.
Thank you.
Great, and then we have the gentleman at the back for the last question.
Where's that?
Here we go, there, Warren.
Hi, my name is David Whittle Thomas from Algara Consulting Mining Engineers. Quick question, if the aliens are occurring on communal land or state-owned land, and there's say a mining permit or mining right that's going to be applied on that land, who does the application? I understand it should be the landowner, but in communal land that's a bit difficult. So I just want some clarity on that, on who should be doing the application. And then just a separate quick question. If there are people clearing aliens for an income on that land, are they in possession of the wood or the aliens, and do they need a separate permit, or do you understand my question? Yeah, two questions. Sorry.
Okay, let me start with the last one that you just asked. In terms of clearing, especially with your plants, we don't regulate that. Normally, if it's firewood, once you've cut the species and then it's firewood, just that there's issues of seeds that you need to, there is advice in terms of how you need to dispose your seeds and all that. But once you've cut the trees, and we normally refer to those like as, we don't regulate those because we as dead species. However, there's also an issue of seeds, and because you might cut a tree and then on the way, en route to wherever you're transporting to, you must be transporting seeds that are still viable. So that's the only issue, the only one of the problems that we have in terms of that. But my colleagues specialists maybe can chip into that in terms of moving those species outside the area where you were controlling. Let's say if you are controlling with your management plan, how are you going to dispose?
Okay, so first of all, if you do apply for a permit for those certain species, if that permit conditions are the reason why they're rejecting it, it will say what is the issue with it. But if you need to remove or translocate biomass, it doesn't help to take it out of a dump on a dump site, just spreading the problem. However, we did draft a document of translocation of biomass we did get from my office. When my colleague is there, she will actually now present, get the details afterwards, so just make contact and we can send it to you and guide you on what to do. Because I am saying to you, you need to go and remove your ALS species, but then you do it on the wrong way, you trigger another list activity under NEMA and disturbing topsoil, which is also not right. So I can guide you on that, on how to draw up your management plan of doing it correctly and not to. So we know there's a bit of conflict between the two relations, but I can guide you on that to go forward. Okay.